Okay, so picture this scenario for a second. It is the absolute height of the Christmas shopping rush last year.
Right, the busiest possible time.
Exactly. And you're looking at the digital infrastructure of a major Spanish retail company.
Oh boy.
Yeah. The physical warehouses are just humming. Delivery trucks are stacked, and the servers are processing, thousands of transactions a minute.
Everything is operating at peak capacity.
Right. And then suddenly everything just stops.
Just a complete halt.
Yeah, complete halt. They get hit by a denial of service attack.
The classic DOS attack.
Which, for those of you who haven't spent time in the IT trenches, that is basically a massive digital traffic jam.
Right, where a malicious actor just floods your servers with so many fake automated requests that the system, it exhausts its resources.
Exactly. Legitimate customers can't even load the checkout page, let alone buy anything.
All right.
But here is where the story pivots from, a standard IT headache into something straight out of a modern thriller.
Oh, because it wasn't a standard attack.
No, not at all. This isn't your traditional brute force attack where a hacker just points a botnet at a server and overwhelms it with a static wall of junk traffic.
Right, that's the old way of doing things.
Yeah. This attack is being actively orchestrated by an AI bot.
And that changes everything.
It really does. Because this bot is watching the retailer's web application firewalls and automated defenses in real time.
Wow.
Yeah. So when the retailer's systems recognize a pattern and put up a block against a certain type of traffic,
the AI instantly analyzes that block.
Exactly. It analyzes it and changes its attack vectors on the fly.
That is terrifying.
It actively load balances its own malicious traffic. It shifts protocols, alters request headers, and just, modifies its behavioral fingerprint to find the next weakest point in the armor.
It's essentially a live high-speed chess match.
Yes, but it's machines, fighting machines at algorithmic speed, while the human IT staff can really do little more than sit there and watch the monitors blink red.
Yeah, that imagery really captures the terror of the modern security operations center. The fundamental architecture of a cyber attack has evolved.
Right, from a static payload to something totally dynamic.
Exactly. It's a thinking adversary now. A human operator just cannot adapt firewall rules fast enough to outmaneuver an autonomous agent.
Because the agent is testing, tens of thousands of permutations per second?
Easily. We have officially crossed the threshold into a paradigm where human reaction time is actually the biggest vulnerability in the network.
And that attack wasn't science fiction, by the way. It was last Christmas.
Right.
And whether you are the chief information security officer for a global enterprise listening to this on your commute, or you are running a local business trying to figure out your IT budget, you need to pay attention.
Because the gap between the attacker's AI capabilities and your own defenses is arguably the most expensive existential problem you are going to face this year.
Exactly. Which is why today we're doing a deep dive into the new realities of the 2026 cyber landscape.
And we are pulling some incredible insights from a deeply technical interview with industry veterans Pablo Vera and Gonzalo Asensio.
Yeah, their insights are just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Our mission today is to break down the mechanics of agentic AI and the massive data leaks happening right under our noses through shadow AI.
Right. Plus, we'll look at how to completely rebuild network architecture around this idea of zero trust.
And we can't forget those unforgiving new regulations like NIS2 and what they mean for the economy.
Because that Christmas attack story,
Yeah.
to truly grasp the severity of that improvisational capability, we have to look under the hood at the new economics of cyber warfare.
Right, because Vera and Asensio highlight that this specific Christmas attack, which was linked to a broader campaign they call Sano, was almost certainly non-directed.
Right.
So by non-directed, I'm assuming that means the attackers didn't sit in a dark room and map out this specific retailer's executive board.
No, not at all.
They weren't hunting a whale, so to speak. They were just dragging a massive automated net across the entire ocean to see what they could catch.
That is exactly the mechanism at play here. Historically, a highly sophisticated attack required a dedicated team of elite hackers.
Right, taking weeks of reconnaissance.
Exactly. Writing bespoke malware, manually orchestrating the intrusion, it was incredibly expensive.
So they had to target organizations with massive payouts just to justify their return on investment.
Yes, but today, the cost for adversaries to launch these sophisticated adaptive attacks has plummeted to practically zero.
Because they are outsourcing the heavy lifting to generative AI and automated scripting.
Precisely. Instead of a team of humans writing code for 3 weeks, a single bad actor prompts an AI model.
One that's been stripped of its safety guardrails, obviously.
Of course. And they tell it to generate a polymorphic attack script, package it, and deploy it across a hijacked proxy network of residential IP addresses.
What used to take a month now takes, what, maybe 10 minutes?
10 minutes and a few dollars in cloud compute costs.
That is just wild.
And that introduces a brutal asymmetry into the landscape. The attacker has essentially eliminated their overhead.
Right, they can deploy an autonomous bot to scan millions of IP addresses.
Constantly probing for unpatched vulnerabilities, open ports, or misconfigured cloud buckets.
And they can afford for that bot to fail 99.9% of the time.
Because the compute cost of those failures is fractions of a cent.
But if they find one single open window, one unpatched server in some subsidiary the target company forgot they even owned, the payoff is catastrophic.
It's massive.
It reminds me of the evolution of the robocall, but weaponized on a structural level.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Scammers using autodialers don't care if thousands of people hang up on them instantly.
Right, the software is doing the dialing for free.
Yeah. There's usually one person to stay on the line and hand over their credit card to fund the entire month's operation.
Exactly. But here, instead of trying to trick a human into buying a fake warranty, these AI bots are violently jiggling the digital door handles of every server on the internet simultaneously.
But the defenders aren't just unplugging their servers and hiding under the desk, right? They are deploying AI natively within their own systems to counter this.
They have to. The defense side is undergoing a radical transformation as well.
So how are Security Operations Center teams, or SOC teams, changing how they process threat intelligence?
Well, before this level of AI integration, a human analyst would see an alert, and they would have to manually pull logs from the firewall.
And cross-reference them with the endpoint detection software on the employee's laptop.
Exactly. Check IP addresses against global threat databases, try to piece together a narrative of what was actually happening.
It sounds exhausting.
That process could easily take 20 to 30 minutes per alert.
Which is an eternity when the attacking AI is moving laterally through your network in milliseconds.
Exactly. So defensive AI fundamentally changes the job from data gathering to contextual synthesis.
Okay, so what does that actually look like? So just reading the logs faster?
It's doing a different job. It ingests this massive, chaotic stream of telemetry data from every sensor in the network.
Okay.
It correlates a firewall spike with an unusual login time from an employee account.
Ah, so it sees the bigger picture instantly.
Right. It recognizes the behavioral pattern of the malware from its training data and presents the human analyst with a prepackaged, highly synthesized incident report.
So it reduces the time from 20 minutes down to a matter of seconds.
Allowing the human to simply authorize the remediation rather than doing the forensic digging.
But implementing that kind of defensive architecture sounds exponentially more complicated and expensive than what the attackers are doing.
Oh, it absolutely is.
Because if an attacker can rent a cheap, jailbroken LLM on the dark web for a few bucks, the enterprise defender has to build a permanent, deeply integrated infrastructure.
Right, to monitor petabytes of internal data without crashing the network. The sources specifically call out the massive reliance on NVIDIA chips here.
Yeah, I saw that. You need localized, high-performance compute clusters.
Because you cannot afford the latency of sending your security logs to a cloud provider and waiting for a response during an active breach.
Right, you need it on-premise. Racks of highly specialized, incredibly expensive GPUs.
And you're paying for the massive energy consumption to cool them, plus hiring specialized AI engineers to fine-tune the models to your specific network.
So let's look at the board here. The attacker spends $50 to launch a dynamic AI-driven swarm attack.
Right.
And the defender spends $5 million on hardware, software, and talent just to build a wall capable of recognizing the swarm.
It's a brutal asymmetry.
I mean, structurally, how can the defense ever actually win if the attacker's surface area for experimentation is infinite and cheap, while the defender's perimeter is rigid and expensive?
That is the existential debate in the industry right now. Some argue defenders actually retain a fundamental advantage because they control the terrain.
Right. They dictate the architecture of the network. They hold the cryptographic keys.
Exactly. And they define the baseline of normal behavior. An AI model trained on the defender's specific environment has an intimate understanding of what normal looks like.
Making anomalies theoretically easier to spot.
Yes.
I hear that, but I have to push back a bit.
Go for it.
Controlling the terrain only matters if you have complete visibility over it.
Right.
And in a modern multinational corporation, the terrain includes thousands of remote employees, third-party vendor APIs, and legacy systems running obsolete code.
Yeah, and that random cloud bucket someone spun up for a marketing project 3 years ago and completely forgot to secure.
Exactly. The attacker doesn't need to defeat your multi-million-dollar NVIDIA-powered core defense.
Right, they just need to find that one legacy server sitting in the corner.
Yeah, the one that isn't plugged into the AI monitoring system.
And your critique perfectly aligns with the sober reality presented by Vera and Asensio.
Right, they can see that structurally, the defense is almost perpetually reacting.
Yes, the goal of modern cybersecurity is rarely to achieve impenetrable perfection.
Because predicting a completely novel, AI-generated zero-day exploit before it executes is scientifically improbable.
Exactly. The objective they outline is to be as close behind as possible. You accept the reality of the breach.
But you utilize your localized AI to compress the detection timeline from days to milliseconds.
Suffocating the attack before data exfiltration occurs.
It really is algorithmic trench warfare. You know the enemy is going to cross no man's land, but you want your automated machine guns to activate the microsecond a wire is tripped.
Rather than waiting for a human guard to sound the alarm exactly.
But, building that automated defense grid leads us directly into this massive problem of technological bloat.
Oh, the buzzword fatigue.
Yes. Companies are terrified of being breached, so they just throw money at any vendor selling a solution.
The enterprise technology sector is notorious for its hype cycles, and cybersecurity is perhaps the worst offender.
The sources describe a very specific predatory cycle of inventing names.
Right, where a vendor takes a relatively established concept, adds a minor feature, rebrands it with a new acronym, and markets it to CIOs as an absolute necessity.
And the CIO, terrified of being the person responsible for the next headline-making data breach, buys it.
They deploy it, but before their engineering team even finishes integrating this new tool...
The vendor is back at the door selling the next acronym.
Exactly. You end up with these Fortune 500 companies possessing a tech stack that resembles a digital junkyard.
80 different security tools from 40 different vendors.
And half of them are duplicating the exact same processes.
None of them communicate with each other through unified APIs, and the IT staff is overwhelmed just managing the alerts from the tools themselves.
And that bloat makes the network significantly less secure. Complexity is the enemy of security.
Which is why the sources deliberately contrast this historical cycle of bloated, rules-based automation with the genuine paradigm shift of modern AI.
Right. Things like robotic process automation or RPA.
Because setting up a script to automatically block an IP address if it fails a password login 5 times isn't intelligence. It is just a brittle rule.
Yeah, RPA is just a digital flowchart. If X happens, then execute Y.
And if a process deviates even slightly from the flowchart, the automation breaks, and a human has to intervene.
But the experts argue that the true differentiator of the AI we are seeing deployed now isn't just speed.
It is context.
Contextual understanding is the holy grail of threat detection. Let's look at how context changes an outcome.
Go, lay it out.
Imagine a highly sophisticated adversary launching a smokescreen attack. They initiate a massive, noisy, distributed denial-of-service attack against a company's public-facing web servers.
Right, the digital traffic jam we talked about earlier. Alarms are blaring, red lights are flashing, engineers are frantically trying to reroute traffic.
Exactly. A traditional rules-based system sees the massive spike in traffic, categorizes it as the primary threat, and allocates all its automated resources to mitigating that single event.
But the adversary planned for that.
Yes. While the entire defense infrastructure is distracted by the noise at the front door, the attacker is quietly executing a slow, low-volume exfiltration of a highly sensitive database.
Through a forgotten API endpoint at the back of the network.
Exactly.
Without context, the automated system operates like a bouncer at a club who is so focused on breaking up a loud fistfight on the sidewalk
that he completely ignores the team of professional thieves quietly picking the lock on the back office safe.
The human analysts are blinded by the sheer volume of the smokescreen.
But an AI model equipped with deep contextual understanding doesn't just measure volume.
It analyzes behavior, intent, and historical baselines simultaneously across the entire network architecture.
Right. So the AI is looking at the metadata of the network traffic. It sees the massive DDoS attack at the front door.
Analyzes the packet structure and perhaps realizes, hey, This traffic is highly repetitive, unauthenticated junk. It is disruptive, but it is not attempting to steal data.
But simultaneously, it detects a tiny 2 kilobyte encrypted stream of data leaving the internal HR server.
Heading to an unknown external IP address in a country the company has no business with.
And because the AI understands the value of the assets, it knows the HR server contains personally identifiable information.
While the public web server just hosts marketing copy.
Exactly. It dynamically reprioritizes the threat. It flags the tiny encrypted stream as the critical existential danger,
It automatically severs that specific connection and alerts the human team.
effectively filtering the wheat from the chaff.
It's like trying to find a single counterfeiter in a massive crowded casino.
That's a perfect analogy.
A traditional system is just watching the total volume of money moving across the floor. But the AI is watching every single hand of blackjack simultaneously.
Analyzing betting patterns, subtle movements of chips.
And it taps the pit boss on the shoulder to point out the one guy at table 4 who is quietly swapping out a single $100 bill.
That level of contextual awareness is staggering.
It is. But the conversation in our sources quickly pivots from defensive algorithms to something that fundamentally alters how humans interact with software.
Right, we have to talk about the leap from generative AI to agentic AI.
This feels like the most critical distinction for any organization mapping out their tech strategy over the next couple of years.
Oh, absolutely. We operate primarily in a generative AI paradigm right now. You interface with a large language model.
You provide a prompt, it processes the query, and generates a response.
Right, it is a highly advanced conversational tool, but it is fundamentally reactive and stateless. Once it gives you the answer, the interaction is over until you prompt it again.
So I asked ChatGPT to write a polite email to a difficult vendor. It writes the draft, I copy and paste it, and we are done.
The model doesn't care if you actually send the email.
And it certainly doesn't read the vendor's reply.
Exactly. But agentic AI, the framework these experts are saying will dominate the corporate landscape by 2026, is a totally different architecture.
It moves from stateless generation to stateful autonomous looping.
Right. To understand the mechanics of an agent, you have to look at its components. An agentic system possesses a core reasoning engine, usually an LLM, but it is also equipped with memory, planning capabilities, and tools.
You don't give an agent a prompt, you give it a goal.
Exactly.
So instead of saying, write an email draft, I tell my agent, resolve this billing dispute with the vendor.
And the agent takes that high-level goal, breaks it down into a multi-step plan, and begins executing.
It accesses my email client via an API to read the history of the dispute.
It accesses the company's financial software to pull the original purchase order.
It drafts the email, sets a timer in its memory, and if the vendor doesn't reply in 48 hours,
The agent automatically drafts a follow-up.
it loops in the legal department and updates a spreadsheet with the status of the dispute.
It operates autonomously in the background, continuously driving toward the goal.
And this is where the experts categorize the corporate AI landscape into 3 distinct pillars.
The first is generative, the user interface we just discussed.
The second is private models. Those are the massive proprietary prediction engines housed internally.
Right. A global logistics company might feed 10 years of highly confidential supply chain data into a private model to optimize shipping routes.
That makes sense. It's an incredibly powerful calculator that never touches the public internet.
But the third pillar is the agentic framework. This is the connective tissue. This is machines talking directly to other machines,
My billing agent negotiating directly with the vendor's accounts receivable agent.
exchanging structured data payloads, validating contracts, and settling payments in milliseconds without a human ever reading an email.
The economic incentives driving this transition are undeniable.
The sheer volume of mundane, repetitive workflows that consume the modern knowledge worker's day can be automated almost entirely.
This is why the sources predict an astonishing adoption curve. They state that within a very short time frame, the average corporate user will employ roughly 200 distinct agents operating on their behalf.
200 autonomous programs per employee.
I read that statistic in the material, and I had to stop and physically walk away from my desk for a minute.
It is a lot to process.
200. If a company has 1,000 employees, that is a swarm of 200,000 invisible algorithmic assistants constantly reading files, sending data, querying databases, and making decisions.
Yeah.
I mean, I have an agent managing my calendar, an agent writing code, an agent scraping competitor websites. How does a chief information security officer not just immediately resign when faced with that reality.
The logistical complexity is staggering. The attack surface isn't just expanding, it's practically exploding into a completely unmappable dimension.
And it is compounded by the hardware revolution the sources outline.
Yes.
Yes.
We are moving beyond the laptop screen as the primary interface. The experts discuss the active development of wearable agents.
Earpieces, smart glasses equipped with cameras.
Even theoretical smart contact lenses. These devices are designed to act as persistent, continuous co-pilots, processing audio and visual data in real time.
They use the visceral example of a medical consultation.
Oh, that was fascinating. You are sitting in the exam room, and your doctor is explaining your test results.
But your smart glasses are recording the conversation.
Running an optical character recognition scan on the physical chart sitting on the doctor's desk.
Querying a massive medical database via an LLM and whispering into your earpiece, the doctor's primary diagnosis is statistically sound, but they haven't accounted for the interaction with that medication you started 3 years ago.
Ask them about this alternative protocol. It is the ultimate realization of ubiquitous computing.
But it brings us directly back to the CISO's nightmare.
Right.
If an employee walks into a highly classified corporate strategy meeting wearing an earpiece that is continuously recording audio, processing it through an LLM to generate real-time meeting notes.
Where is that audio data actually going? Who owns the model processing it?
And that leads us headfirst into the most pervasive, invisible threat modern companies are dealing with right now: shadow AI.
Yes. If you are listening to this on a corporate laptop right now, there is a very high probability that your IT department is completely blind to at least half of the software as a service applications you actually use to do your job.
Employees are constantly seeking efficiency. If the official corporate software is slow and clunky, the employee will quietly sign up for a web-based AI tool to get the job done faster.
And the sources define shadow AI not just as unauthorized software usage, but as the uncontrolled leakage of highly proprietary intellectual property into public AI training data.
Right. An employee in the finance department might take a massive, unreleased quarterly earnings report, strip off the cover page, and paste the raw financial tables into a public instance of a large language model.
Simply asking it to summarize the key trends for a PowerPoint presentation.
The employee thinks they're just being productive. They get a great summary in 10 seconds, they put it in a deck, and their boss praises them for their quick work.
But what they don't realize is that the data they just pasted into that prompt window is now ingested by the public model. It becomes part of the training weights.
And next week, when an analyst at a rival hedge fund asks that same public model, what are the predicted Q3 earnings for this specific sector based on your most recent data?
The model might inadvertently regurgitate the exact confidential figures the employee pasted in.
The historical knee-jerk reaction from corporate security teams, particularly in highly regulated sectors like banking, has been the nuclear option.
Blanket bans. They identify the IP addresses of the major generative AI platforms, update the corporate firewall, and shut it down.
No access to ChatGPT, no access to Claude, no access to external AI tools on company hardware.
But banning technology that offers a 10x productivity multiplier never works.
It's like a high school trying to ban calculators during a calculus exam.
Exactly. You can enforce the ban strictly within the four walls of the classroom, but eventually the real world demands efficiency.
So if you ban the AI interface on the corporate laptop, the employee, desperate to finish their presentation by 5 p.m., is just going to pull out their personal smartphone onto the desk.
They will literally take a photograph of the confidential spreadsheet on their monitor, upload it to the AI app on their personal device, get the summary, and type it manually back into the presentation.
And in that scenario, the security team has achieved the worst possible outcome.
The sensitive data has still been leaked to a public model. But now the IT department has absolutely zero telemetry, no audit trail, and no awareness that the breach even occurred.
The sources highlight a significantly more pragmatic, sophisticated approach taken by Bankinter, a major Spanish financial institution.
Right. Bankinter looked at the landscape and realized that attempting to prohibit the tide of AI adoption was fundamentally futile.
They recognize that these tools are a permanent, necessary evolution for their workforce.
So instead of banning the tools, they implemented an architecture based on strict technological mediation. They built proxies.
To understand the elegance of this solution, we have to look at the mechanics of reverse proxy in this specific context. A proxy acts as an intermediary server, right?
Yes. Bankinter allows their employees to interface with AI models, but the employees are not connecting directly to the public internet. They are connecting to Bankinter's internal proxy interface.
So if I am a Bankinter employee, the interface on my screen looks and feels exactly like the chatbot I am used to.
But when you type a prompt and hit enter, that text doesn't go straight to OpenAI or Anthropic. It goes to the internal proxy first.
So what exactly is the proxy doing to the text before it forwards it? Is it just looking for a list of banned words?
It is far more sophisticated than simple keyword matching. The proxy acts as a dynamic data loss prevention engine.
Okay.
When the employee submits a prompt, say, asking the AI to analyze a contract, the proxy intercepts the API call. It scans the entire payload using its own localized, highly secure semantic models.
It is looking for patterns that indicate confidential data, account numbers, specific client names, proprietary financial structures, or internal project code words.
Exactly. So if the proxy detects that the employee pasted a contract containing a client-specific investment portfolio, it doesn't just block the prompt and punish the employee.
It sanitizes it.
Yes, it utilizes tokenization and masking. The proxy will dynamically strip out the client's name and the specific account numbers, replacing them with generic placeholders like clienta and account 123.
It then takes this sanitized, generalized version of the prompt and forwards it to the external public large language model.
The public model processes a generalized text, does the heavy analytical lifting, identifying the clauses, summarizing the risk, and sends the response back.
The proxy intercepts the response, maps the original confidential data back into the placeholders, and delivers the final, contextually accurate answer to the employee.
The employee gets the full benefit of the AI's reasoning capabilities, but the actual proprietary data never leaves the bank's secure perimeter.
It is a brilliant compromise between security and productivity. It allows the enterprise to control the flow of data, maintain an audit log, and protect IP without generating massive user friction.
However, we have to address a profound contradiction that the sources bring up regarding the fundamental nature of these AI models themselves.
This is where the conversation takes a turn from technical architecture into something almost philosophical.
Yes, it really does.
We've been talking about how to control the flow of data into the models, but the sources highlight a terrifying reality about the models themselves.
Even the pioneers of the industry, the lead researchers, the founders, that specifically mentioned Sam Altman, are going on the record admitting that as these neural networks scale into the billions and trillions of parameters, their behavior becomes inherently unpredictable.
The term often used in the research community is emergent capabilities, right?
Exactly. As a model is trained on exponentially larger data sets with vastly more compute power, it develops abilities and reasoning pathways that its creators never explicitly programmed and, more importantly, cannot fully reverse engineer.
It becomes a black box.
Yeah.
You know the inputs, and you observe the outputs, but the specific mathematical journey the data takes through the hidden layers of the neural network is essentially opaque.
Which obliterates the traditional concept of software security. If I buy a traditional piece of enterprise software, I can demand to see the source code.
You can hire auditors to review every line of logic to ensure there are no backdoors, no memory leaks, and no hidden functions.
But you can't read the weights of a trillion-parameter neural network and deduce its behavior.
And the experts in our sources brilliantly dissect how vendors try to mask this reality. They talk about what they call the illusion of the secure tenant.
Ah, the dragon in Belgium.
Yes. The sources use this wonderful, slightly sarcastic imagery to describe the sales pitch of a modern AI vendor.
Right. The enterprise CIO says, I'm terrified to use your AI because I don't want my data leaking into other companies' models.
And the vendor's sales rep smooths their tie and says, do not worry. We offer a premium enterprise tier secure tenant. Your data is totally isolated.
It will be stored on a dedicated, localized server physically located in Belgium, completely firewalled from the public model, and guarded by a three-headed dragon.
It is designed to evoke this comforting, old-world sense of physical, impenetrable security.
But the experts are fiercely critical of this promise. They argue that relying on geographical isolation or logical partitioning within the architecture of a massive black box neural network is fundamentally naive.
Because if the creator of the model cannot definitively explain how the model arrives at a specific output, They mathematically cannot guarantee that the model won't experience a hallucination that inadvertently draws upon data from an adjacent tenant.
Exactly. They cannot guarantee that a highly sophisticated prompt injection attack won't bypass the theoretical barriers designed to keep the data siloed.
So let me ask the obvious question. If the literal architects of the artificial intelligence are standing on a stage saying, it's a monster, we don't fully understand how it thinks, and it exhibits unpredictable behavior, why are we trusting these systems with the keys to the kingdom?
It's a great question.
How can a Fortune 500 company confidently deploy an autonomous agent to negotiate a multi-million-dollar supply chain contract if they cannot guarantee how that agent will interpret a novel negotiation tactic from a competitor?
That anxiety is precisely what is driving the most significant architectural shift in the history of enterprise IT.
Because if you cannot trust the application because the AI is an unpredictable black box,
And you cannot trust the perimeter of your network because your employees are logging in from personal devices on public Wi-Fi networks across the globe.
then the only logically sound philosophy remaining is to trust absolutely nothing. You must assume that every device, every application, and every user is already compromised.
Which requires a total foundational redefinition of security architecture into a framework known as zero trust, or confianza cero.
The core philosophy of zero trust is conceptually elegant, but notoriously difficult to implement at scale.
It mandates that you grant the absolute minimum privileges necessary for the absolute minimum amount of time required to complete a specific, verified task.
Trust is never granted implicitly based on location or credentials. It must be continuously evaluated.
Let's break down the mechanics of how different this is from the old world. The traditional approach to network security was basically a medieval castle with a moat.
You had your corporate firewall, the thick stone walls. You had a VPN gateway, the drawbridge.
If an employee provided the correct username and password at the drawbridge, the guards let them inside.
And once they were inside the castle courtyard, they were generally trusted. They could wander into the armory, they could peek into the treasury.
Their presence inside the perimeter implied authorization.
But the castle model collapsed entirely under the weight of what our sources call the liquid workspace.
Work is no longer a physical building you commute to between 9 and 5. Work is simply an activity that occurs wherever productivity happens.
The perimeter has dissolved. An employee might start a document on a highly secured corporate desktop in the Madrid office on Monday.
On Tuesday, they are reviewing that same document on an iPad while riding a high-speed train using a tethered cellular connection.
On Wednesday, they are collaborating on that document with a freelance graphic designer who is logging into a cloud portal from a personal laptop in a coffee shop in Buenos Aires.
A device the company has never scanned, running an operating system the company does not manage. The castle walls do not exist in that scenario.
Therefore, the security perimeter must shrink. It cannot be the network. It must be the data itself.
Zero Trust shifts the paradigm from authenticating the user's connection to the network to continuously authenticating the user's specific request to access a specific piece of data.
It does not matter if you have successfully logged into the corporate VPN. What matters is whether the system, in this exact millisecond, under these exact contextual conditions, believes you have the right to open this exact Excel file.
So instead of a castle with a moat, Zero Trust is like a massive, high-security biological research lab. Getting through the front door doesn't give you access to anything.
You have to scan your cryptographic badge, verify your biometric retina scan, and enter a multi-factor PIN code for every single individual door you attempt to open in the hallway.
And crucially, and this is where the AI comes back in, even after you are inside the secure room, the system is watching you.
If your heart rate spikes, or you start downloading files at a speed faster than humanly possible, the system assumes you have been compromised, locks the doors, and revokes your access instantly.
That continuous monitoring is the engine of Zero Trust. Identity providers and access management systems are ingesting massive streams of telemetry to calculate a dynamic risk score for every user session.
The system looks at the IP address, the geolocation, the specific hardware footprint of the device, the time of day, and even the biometric typing cadence of the user.
So, if a senior financial analyst normally logs in from their home in Barcelona at 8:30 a.m., uses a corporate-issued Mac, and typically accesses the internal accounting dashboards.
The system establishes that as a baseline of normal behavior.
Precisely. The risk score remains low, and the access is frictionless.
But if, at 300 a.m. on a Sunday, That exact same user profile successfully authenticates with the correct password, but the connection originates from an anonymous VPN endpoint in Eastern Europe.
And the device is a Linux machine trying to initiate a bulk download of the entire employee HR database.
The password might be correct, but the context is entirely anomalous.
The system dynamically recalculates the risk score. It shoots up into the red zone.
It doesn't necessarily block them outright immediately, but it steps up the authentication requirements. It might demand a hardware security key insertion or push a biometric approval to a secondary device.
If the anomalous behavior continues, the system automatically severs the session token, cutting the connection entirely.
But to orchestrate this level of granular data-centric security, you have to actually know what data you are protecting. And this brings us to a massive operational hurdle the sources highlight with the acronym DSPM.
DSPM stands for Data Security Posture Management. In simple terms, it is the process of mapping, classifying, and protecting sensitive data across an organization's entire digital footprint.
Cloud storage, on-premise servers, and SaaS applications.
The fundamental challenge that DSPM attempts to solve is the terrifying reality of unstructured data.
Unstructured data is the dark matter of corporate IT. Protecting structured data is relatively easy. A SQL database full of credit card numbers is structured.
You know exactly what the column is, you know the exact 16-digit format of the data, and you can easily write a rule to encrypt it and lock it down.
But a Word document titled Meeting Notes Q3 that a manager casually saved to a shared cloud drive, that is unstructured.
And that Word document might contain a casual written discussion about an impending unannounced corporate acquisition. It might contain the personal health information of an employee discussed during an HR review.
Historically, the IT department had to rely entirely on humans to manually classify that unstructured data.
They relied on a drop-down menu. The employee finishes typing the document, hits save, and a little dialog box pops up asking them to classify the file as public, internal, or highly confidential.
But humans are the weakest link. We are in a rush. We are lazy.
We click the default internal option just to make the box go away, completely forgetting that we just summarized the CEO's secret strategic pivot in the second paragraph.
And if the human fails to tag the document correctly, the automated security rules never apply to it. It sits unprotected on a shared drive, waiting for an attacker or a rogue internal AI agent to scoop it up.
This is where deploying semantic AI within a DSPM framework is revolutionary. You no longer rely on human compliance or rigid keyword searches.
A traditional keyword search is dumb. If I set a rule to look for the word confidential, an attacker can just name their exfiltration file recipes.docs and bypass the scanner.
But semantic AI doesn't look at the format. It reads the intent.
Exactly. The AI model continuously scans the petabytes of unstructured files across the network. It literally reads the text.
It parses the sentence structure. It understands the context. It realizes this language proposed stock-for-stock merger, synergy targets, regulatory approval timelines, indicates high-level financial maneuvering for an unreleased event.
The AI dynamically classifies the document as top secret, applies the appropriate cryptographic encryption, and updates the zero trust access policies so only the CFO and legal team can open it, entirely without the original author ever clicking a button.
It is an incredibly elegant application of the technology.
But I have to play devil's advocate here regarding the human experience.
Oh, for sure.
If I am an employee in this zero trust, AI-monitored panopticon, every document I write is being silently read and classified by an algorithm. Every time I switch from my laptop to my phone to read an email, the system is calculating my typing cadence and risk score.
Constantly second-guessing your identity, demanding biometric scans because you logged in from a new coffee shop.
Does this relentless, continuous monitoring make the actual experience of doing your job utterly miserable? Are we trading creative productivity for absolute paranoia?
That friction is the primary reason zero-trust initiatives fail in the real world. Security teams often design architectures that look brilliant on a whiteboard but are practically hostile to the user experience.
So what's the solution?
The goal of a mature zero-trust implementation, what the industry calls invisible security, is to utilize AI to handle the continuous authentication so smoothly that the legitimate user rarely notices it.
The system relies on passive telemetry device health, behavioral patterns, to maintain trust.
The user only encounters a hard friction point, a multi-factor prompt or a block, when they actually attempt an action that deviates significantly from their established baseline.
But achieving that seamless experience requires a level of orchestration, fine-tuning, and compute power that is astronomically expensive.
Which brings us to the harsh economic reality check of this entire conversation.
It is fascinating to discuss how massive global banks like Bankinter or Fortune 500 tech giants can afford to build these sophisticated, AI-driven, continuous monitoring zero-trust environments.
They have multi-million-dollar security budgets. They can afford to buy racks of NVIDIA H100 chips. They have teams of elite data scientists fine-tuning their proxy models.
But what happens when the regulatory bodies look at this advanced architecture and decide that everyone must use it? What happens when the government steps in and mandates enterprise-level security standards for the little guy down the street?
This is where the theoretical discussion collides violently with macroeconomic policy. The sources pivot to a deep analysis of the regulatory squeeze currently happening in Europe, specifically focusing on sweeping new legislative frameworks like the NIS2 directive.
For those who aren't reading European Union compliance law for fun, NIS2, the Network and Information Security Directive, is a massive expansion of cybersecurity mandates.
It basically says that if you want to operate in critical sectors of the digital economy, or if you want to be a supplier in the supply chain of a larger regulated company, you must prove that you meet a very strict, legally binding baseline of cybersecurity hygiene.
You have to have incident response plans, encrypted backups, risk management frameworks, and strict access controls.
And the penalties for noncompliance are severe. We are talking about massive fines tied to a percentage of global revenue, and in some jurisdictions, holding the C-suite executives personally legally liable for gross negligence in the event of a preventable breach.
The sources present a very grounded, incredibly vivid hypothetical to illustrate the collateral damage of these regulations. They introduce us to Graficus Mariano.
Graficus Mariano, it is the perfect archetype.
Imagine a small, family-owned printing and logistics shop in a mid-sized Spanish town. Mariano has been running the business for 30 years. He has 15 employees.
He prints promotional flyers, handles physical mailers, and maybe manages some basic shipping logistics for local government offices and a few mid-sized corporate clients.
Mariano's IT infrastructure consists of a few outdated Windows PCs, a shared network drive, and a commercial antivirus subscription he buys once a year.
Suddenly, Mariano receives a registered letter from one of his largest corporate clients. Perhaps a regional bank that uses him to print their monthly statements.
The bank is now subjected to NIS2 compliance. The bank's auditors inform Mariano that because he handles sensitive client data names, addresses, account balances for the mailers, he is part of their critical supply chain.
To maintain his printing contract, Mariano must undergo a third-party security audit and prove he has implemented enterprise-grade threat detection, encrypted data pipelines, and a 247 incident response capability.
Mariano is suddenly expected to behave like a multinational tech company. He is told he needs to spend tens of thousands of euros on software, hardware, and consulting fees just to meet these standards.
Simply to maintain the revenue stream he already has.
And the most brutal aspect of this regulatory environment, as the sources emphasize, is the fundamental disconnect between the mandate and the funding.
The government passes the law enforcing the standards, but they provide absolutely zero financial subsidies or grants to help small businesses actually afford the technology required to comply.
The experts unpack this excruciating friction between state governance and economic reality. From a macroeconomic security perspective, the regulations are entirely logical and necessary to defend national infrastructure.
The government knows that sophisticated state-sponsored hackers rarely launch frontal assaults against heavily fortified financial institutions or utility grids.
They don't try to break through the castle walls. They attack the supply chain.
The hackers target the weak link, the local HVAC vendor who has remote access to the bank's climate control systems, or the small printing shop that receives unencrypted data files from the bank's marketing department.
They compromise Mariano's outdated PC, steal his login credentials, and use his trusted vendor connection to backdoor their way into the bank's highly secure core network.
Exactly. The vulnerability of the entire ecosystem is dictated by the weakest node. Therefore, the state must force the baseline up for everyone.
But by doing so through unfunded mandates, they create an existential financial crisis for small and medium enterprises. Mariano cannot afford to hire a dedicated chief information security officer. He cannot afford to build a zero-trust architecture.
It's like the government passing a law that says, for environmental reasons, every bicycle on the road must be retrofitted with a zero-emissions jet turbine, but refusing to offer a tax credit for the turbines.
Graficus Mariano just wants to pedal his bike and print his flyers. Why does a print shop need to deploy the same defensive mechanisms as a central bank?
So the natural question, and the one we've been building toward this entire time, is whether technology can solve the problem technology created. Can AI save Mariano?
We just spent an hour talking about how AI slashes human labor costs, automates complex workflows, and synthesizes data instantly. Can AI democratize cybersecurity so the small 15-person print shop can afford to deploy an autonomous agent to protect their network?
The brutal truth extracted directly from our forces.
Yep.
Not yet.
Ouch. So much for the techno-utopian rescue.
The experts are refreshingly realistic about the current economic life cycle of AI. Right now, sophisticated artificial intelligence is incredibly prohibitively expensive to develop, train, and run.
They compare this specific moment in time to the early days of cloud computing data centers or the introduction of the first smartphones. The initial curve of any massive technological revolution is inherently exclusive because the research and development costs, the hardware acquisition, and the energy consumption are astronomical.
They made a very pointed observation about the market dynamics right now. Currently, almost none of the major foundational AI companies are actually turning a sustainable operating profit on the technology itself.
The entire industry is floating on an ocean of venture capital, subsidized compute credits, and massive corporate debt, all betting on future dominance.
The underlying inference is that the true cost of running these models is currently being masked. So if Mariano tries to buy an off-the-shelf AI security agent right now, he's either buying snake oil or he's paying a massive premium to access an API that he doesn't know how to integrate into his legacy printing software anyway.
Precisely. The autonomous plug-and-play AI security agent that can seamlessly defend a small business without human oversight does not exist in a commercially viable form yet.
So what is the path forward? If Mariano cannot afford the technology and he cannot afford the fines, how does he survive the regulatory squeeze?
The definitive solution proposed by the sources is that small businesses must abandon the idea of managing their own security entirely. They must embrace the model of managed service providers, or MSPs.
Okay, so outsourcing the security operations to a specialized firm. But how does that actually solve the financial equation for a small business? If the tech is expensive, isn't the MSP just going to charge Mariano an exorbitant fee to run it for him?
The mechanism that makes it viable is economies of scale. An MSP operates by pooling risk and resources.
The MSP makes the massive, multi-million-dollar capital investment.
They buy the NVIDIA hardware clusters, they license the advanced AI-driven detection engines, and they hire the elite team of cybersecurity analysts to staff a 247 security operations center.
But instead of deploying that massive infrastructure for a single company, they use multi-tenant cloud architecture to spread the capability and the cost across hundreds or even thousands of small business clients.
Ah, I see. It's the concept of shared infrastructure. Mariano doesn't need to buy the jet turbine for his bicycle. He just pays a small monthly subscription fee to ride the high-speed train built by the MSP.
For a predictable operational expense, maybe a few €100 a month, Graphica's, Mariano gets their endpoints monitored by the exact same sophisticated XDR extended detection and response software that the massive enterprise down the street uses.
If a ransomware payload drops onto Mariano's print server at 2 a.m., the AI engine in the MSP's centralized data center detects the behavioral anomaly, isolates the server, and alerts the human analyst on duty who remediates the threat while Mariano is asleep.
It is the only mathematically sound path forward for the lower and middle market. The consolidation of security into specialized providers is inevitable because the complexity of the threat landscape has simply outgrown the capability of a generalist IT administrator.
And this transition, this desperate need to figure out how to deploy AI defensively while mitigating its offensive capabilities, is not just a niche debate, it is entirely consuming the professional community.
The sources briefly highlight the upcoming RootedCon event, one of the premier cybersecurity conferences in Europe.
They note that out of over 300 highly technical talk submissions from the community, a staggering 20% were specifically and exclusively focused on artificial intelligence.
That is a massive signal. The entire brain trust of the cybersecurity world is pivoting to address this specific dynamic. But I have to push back on the underlying tone of our experts as we reach the end of this analysis.
Go on.
Throughout the interview, Vera and Asensio maintain this persistent insistence that we should view the future with optimism. But I am looking at the board we have laid out over the last hour.
It is a sobering board.
We have non-directed AI bots launching dynamic, highly evasive DOS attacks for the cost of a cup of coffee. We have enterprise employees unknowingly leaking their company's most sensitive intellectual property into public models via a swarm of 200 shadow AI agents that no IT department can fully map.
We have foundational LLMs that their own creators admit are unpredictable black boxes.
And we have massive, unforgiving regulatory mandates threatening to bankrupt small, family-owned supply chain vendors who can't afford the bleeding-edge technology required to comply. Given all of those structural realities, where exactly is this optimism coming from?
Are they just adopting an optimistic posture because, at the end of the day, they are executives operating within an industry that makes its money by selling the software to fix these exact problems?
It is a highly necessary and valid critique. One must always analyze the commercial incentives of the messenger.
If you are selling the antidote, it behooves you to present the poison as deadly but ultimately survivable if the client purchases your specific regimen.
However, stripping away the commercial layer, their optimism appears to be genuinely rooted in the human element of the equation.
They continuously emphasize the talent, the extreme dedication, and the collaborative nature of the defensive community.
The fact that researchers at events like RootedCon are openly sharing their findings, actively stress-testing models, and building open-source defensive tools demonstrates a collective resilience.
The technology they are facing is undeniably daunting, but the human ingenuity, the sheer intellectual horsepower being marshaled to build these new zero-trust architectures and proxy filters is equally formidable.
And that tension between the algorithmic threat and human ingenuity is a solid place to try and wrap our heads around everything we've unpacked today. What an incredibly dense and revealing journey this deep dive has been.
Truly.
We started by peeling back the terrifying new economics of cyber warfare, how the plunging costs of AI-driven botnets allow adversaries to barrage networks with dynamic improvisational attacks for pennies, forcing defenders into a high-speed, capital-intensive arms race just to stay 1 millisecond behind the breach.
We navigated the chaotic, rapidly approaching frontier of the modern workspace, where the buzzword fatigue of basic automation is being obliterated by the reality of agentic AI.
A near future where every single employee might be managing a personal, invisible swarm of autonomous bots executing multi-step workflows.
We analyzed Bankinter's highly pragmatic approach to the shadow AI crisis, exploring how intelligent proxy servers and dynamic data sanitization offer a path forward when feudal bans inevitably fail.
We broke down the necessary, complex evolution of zero trust, understanding why the collapse of the network perimeter demands that we use semantic AI to continuously authenticate access to unstructured data.
And finally, we grounded all of this high-level theory in the very real, very human struggle of businesses like Graphicus Mariano, facing the crushing, unfunded weight of NIS2 compliance and the absolute economic necessity of surviving through managed service providers.
It is a complex, rapidly shifting, and incredibly unforgiving landscape. Organizations that fail to understand the difference between generative interfaces and agentic workflows or fail to secure their unstructured data will be left extraordinarily vulnerable.
Absolutely.
And to you, the listener, whether you are managing a massive corporate network, building a startup, or just trying to protect your own digital footprint, the value of this deep dive is that you are now thoroughly equipped.
The next time you sit in a budget meeting debating software licenses, or read a terrifying headline about a massive AI-driven data breach, or even look at the new IT policies being rolled out at your own company, you aren't just reacting to the buzzwords.
You have a highly critical, mechanically informed eye. You can see the structural forces, the dropping compute costs, the behavioral shifts toward shadow IT, and the economic realities of regulation that are actually driving the 2026 cyber landscape.
And as we close this analysis, I want to leave you with a final, slightly chilling thought to ponder as you look at the trajectory of the technology we discussed today.
Lay it on us.
We spent a significant amount of time talking about the transition to machines, talking directly to machines. We detailed a near future where your agentic software autonomously negotiates with the vendor's agent to speed up the supply chain.
While simultaneously, an autonomous AI attacker is probing your network at machine speed, forcing your AI defense systems to dynamically alter firewall rules at machine speed to stop them.
Consider the logical endpoint of this algorithmic acceleration. If the attacks, the defenses, and the core business logic of the enterprise are all executing, reacting, and mutating in milliseconds, at what specific point does meaningful human oversight cease to be a policy choice and simply become a physical impossibility?
Are we diligently building a digital infrastructure where the human being is no longer the operator control, but merely a spectator watching the monitors blink and hoping the algorithms negotiate a peace?